Since the previous LSD video did so well, I found another story that's just as terrifying. And as always, stories like this are sourced from Arrowwood.org, a website dedicated to drug harm reduction and drug trip reports. And if you're interested in reading stories like the one that you're about to hear, links to everything you need are in the description down below. Today's story comes from user Neural. It was posted March 9th, 2022. This story starts in my bedroom, a fairly cold, damp, and small space. It wasn't the best room, but it was mine, and I loved it. At the time, I had been having a hard couple of weeks with my mental health, suffering from some fairly severe anxiety and stress issues. I have suffered with anxiety all of my grown life, but it gets more severe during times of high stress. At the time, work was very stressful. In addition, my country was under strict social restrictions due to COVID-19. All these factors combined to make a very bad situation for taking psychedelics. But at the time, I underestimated the power of LSD and did not respect it as I should have. I decided in the morning to take some LSD I bought online a few months ago after a particularly difficult night. This was motivated by past positive experience I had with psychedelics, mostly psilocybin, which really challenged my worldview and helped me a lot with my longer-term mental health issues. I was aiming to get some clarity on causes for my anxieties and potentially to access some difficult truths that I was in denial about that I could use to improve my mental health. I took the tab, unknown strength, in the late morning, as I knew LSD takes a long time and wanted to be done around a reasonable time for sleeping. I stuck out my tongue and let it sit there for a while, then chewed it up and swallowed it. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just watched some miscellaneous videos on my computer. 1 hour in, and I was starting to feel the effects. I felt a bit wobbly and strange, and the music I was listening to at the time started to feel really intense and almost take over my mind. At this point, I would describe the feeling as fairly positive. I put on some of my favorite music on my phone, went to lay down on my bed, and listened to it. I was alone in my room. I lived in a shared household at the time, and my plan was largely to keep to myself. I hadn't informed anyone that I was going to trip. 3 hours in, and I'd been listening to music for a long time, and had been really entranced by it. I was experiencing intense visuals, which were very geometrical and consisted of thousands of intensely tessellating fractals. It was really very beautiful, but also incredibly intense. At this point, I felt inspired to go create some art, so I got out my sketch pad and pen and started jolting down endless geometric patterns, combined with many, many human eyes. I was just allowing my brain to take the wheel with the drawing, almost moving the pen on autopilot slowly. At some point, I went to the toilet as I'd been drinking a lot of water, and it was making its way through me. I remember feeling a bit anxious about this as I didn't want my housemates to notice me, and the bathroom felt very creepy to be in. I think I was stuck in the bathroom for about 15 minutes as I was struggling to function properly. I continued with the drawing for around a half an hour, and then I headed back to bed to listen to some relaxing music as I felt a little bit overwhelmed. 4 hours in, and I don't remember much of what happened between the drawing and now, but I remember this very vividly. I sat on the corner of my bed, and suddenly, out of nowhere, I just knew that I was dead. I was suddenly 100% sure and convinced that I had died in my bed, and I now was experiencing some sort of afterlife. At this point, I was still experiencing strong visuals, but they were almost in the background of my mind as a feeling of sheer panic set in. My perception of time slowed down to a sheer standstill, and I was completely overwhelmed by anxiety. I was shaking and sweating. I looked at myself in the mirror in my room, and I felt like I was looking at someone else. I knew logically that it was me, but it didn't feel like me. It was hard to explain. I felt completely disassociated from my body, and my physical form felt more like a curiosity. At this point, I was completely and utterly out of my depth. About 15 minutes in from now, I was just in a state of complete living nightmare. I went and sat in a spot of my room where the heating unit was, leaning against it and covering myself in a blanket. The physical sensation of heat was giving me a very faint kind of grounding, but I was still 100% convinced that I was not alive and that this was me forever now. 5 hours and 30 minutes in. At this point, I had been sitting against the heater for around an hour. These times are vague estimates as my perception of time was very warped and everything was incredibly slow. I was trying to calm myself down by watching random calming videos on YouTube and eating some snacks. However, I was still in a state of complete fear and panic. I can't even describe the feeling. It's completely incomparable to any level of fear I have ever experienced in my life. I did not fear death. I feared the infinity of potential suffering that could exist. I feared the feeling of experiencing this fear for an eternity and being completely unable to escape it. I couldn't even kill myself to end it, as I was already dead. My poor brain had just completely melted into a soup of one pure, raw emotion. Fear. My vision was completely tunneled. I was shaking. My legs were spasming. I would imagine my heart rate was high at this point, but I didn't check. I periodically checked myself in the mirror to check if my pupils were dilated and almost tried to convince myself that I was high, but I still could not shake the absolute certainty of the feeling that I was dead. In fact, at this point, I had the feeling that I had died 1,000 times over. And I'm not even sure what that means or where that could come from. 9 hours at this point had been stuck in a cycle of lying in bed, leaning against my heater, and occasionally using my computer to access some relaxing nature-based videos to try and soothe myself. I was urinating very frequently, as I had been drinking a very high amount of water, as I for some reason felt like it would help me. In hindsight, I may have been giving myself a mild form of hyponatremia, which have only added to my negative experience. Every time I went to the toilet, I was terrified. I found the room so scary as it was dark and dingy, and also it didn't feel private from my housemates. I had severe anxiety about my housemates finding out about everything when they came into my room and found my body. I think this situation of being alone and feeling worried about others finding out about the trip was a major cause for all of the anxiety I experienced during this trip. The visuals were largely over at this point, with just some residual minor disturbances in my vision. This, however, did not give me any mental relief. I still felt like I was dead and that I'd been sent to hell. This hell for me was experiencing this feeling of completely overwhelming anxiety forever. The anxiety fed anxiety about being anxious and formed a vicious cycle that I did not have the mental fortitude to break. 18 plus hours in, not much has changed over the 9 hours from the last paragraph. I felt completely overwhelmed by fear and was stuck in a constant loop of the bathroom, my bed, the heater, and trying to soothe myself with various online resources. At this point, I had not only had any human contact in around 24 hours or more, and I felt completely insane. I did not feel like this experience would ever end. I researched the duration of LSD. I had done this beforehand too, and I was at least fairly responsible with research, and I saw that I was over the expected duration for the insane effects. In hindsight, I was no longer really tripping, except for some minor effects. Completely unable to sleep, my mind was running at 1,000 kilometers per hour. And only focused on these things. I was dead, I was insane, I was terrified. Time was passing incredibly slowly, and I was in a constant state of fight or flight. It was now the very early morning of the next day, and I needed to urinate again. This time I decided I completely could not face going into the bathroom, so I grabbed a blanket and rolled it up and left the house. It was raining outside, and I walked 2 kilometers to a park. Not the nearest park at all, just one I remembered from a few years back. I intended to sit down in the park with the blanket, but when I got there, I realized this made no sense. I climbed up a muddy slope into some trees in the park, nearly slipping many times as the ground was very wet, and urinated in the bushes. I stood there for maybe 15 or more minutes and then headed back home. It took me a while to get back home, and when I did, I went straight back to my bedroom. The experience of being outside was a bit nicer as the cold rain was a bit grounding, but at this point I felt so completely disconnected from my body that I felt I was playing third person in a video game. When back in my room, I started to get more worried about how I was feeling and started to think about my options. 20 plus hours has passed at this point, and I felt like I had 3 options. 1, jump out of my bedroom window and see what happened. It was high enough to kill me, but I was convinced that I was already dead, so I wasn't sure if that was going to happen. 2, go outside and call an ambulance. This was terrifying to me though, as I was worried that I was alive and they would strap me down in a mental asylum and I'd be trapped in this state of mind forever, as I would never have the opportunity to end my life, which was far more preferable than feeling like this until I died of old age. And then 3, ask my friends or parents for help. I knew at this point I was not in a mental place strong enough to do anything on my own. I had some points where I felt a little bit more connected with reality and some less. Pervasive thought through this whole experience was pure consuming terror. 30 minutes had passed, and I decided to not jump out of my window, as something very primal inside of me, I guess my survival instinct, was against this, even though it felt logical at the time to do it. I then decided to throw out all of my illegal substances and go outside and call an ambulance. However, when I went outside to call the ambulance, the fear of being imprisoned in an insane asylum forever was too overwhelming, and after thinking about it for half an hour, I returned to my bedroom. 21 hours and 30 minutes. At this point, after thinking some more, I decided that I need to speak to my housemate. I went out and found him and explained what was happening. At that time, I had a very strong feeling that he did not really exist, and this was just a figment of my imagination. But I figured there was no harm in speaking to him. He was helpful and comforted me, but did not really know how to handle the situation. We watched some stuff on TV, but I had trouble concentrating due to my mind being consumed by anxiety. I repeatedly asked my housemate to reassure me that he was real, and he did. He reassured me that I would be fine, but I still assumed that this is just the version of him that existed in my own personal hell that only existed to trick me. I was feeling slightly more relaxed having some human contact, but still a solid 9 out of 10 on the scale of fear. A solid 24 hours had passed, and after sitting with my housemate for a few hours, I realized that this was not going to cut it. He tried to convince me to go to the hospital, but I was strongly against it due to the aforementioned fears. I instead opted to call my parents. However, I had to get him to explain what happened on the phone, as I was sobbing too much and felt completely paralyzed and unable to speak. My parents were very concerned and agreed to come get me and take me home with them. 28 hours at this point, and I survived the journey home with my parents, who were mostly just worried about me at this point. I was finally starting to calm down as I was able to notice more that my trip was coming to an end and that this anxiety started to fade. I started to feel more normal. I eventually finally managed to sleep for a bit. I will end the time-based prompts here and talk a bit more about the aftermath. For a few days after this experience, I struggled getting to sleep at all. Any slight thought about the nature of reality would trigger these feelings of me being dead and everything not being real and part of my personal hell again. I felt very disassociated from my body for this period. I had little appetite and did not have that many bodily sensations in general. These were, I guess, the aftermath of an extremely long panic attacks and trauma experience. Over the course of the next few days, the recurrent panic attacks became less frequent and severe. At first, I had to sleep in the same bed as everyone else, but after around 3 days, I started being able to sleep alone. For the first week or so afterwards, I had to have someone in the same building as me at all times, or I would immediately have a panic attack. For the first 3 to 4 days, they had to be in the same room. Over the course of the next few weeks, I built up confidence being alone in a room and/or building for longer periods of time, until I could spend large portions of the day alone. I went to the doctors and was prescribed medication to help me sleep and help with anxiety. I also started therapy for a couple of weeks. The trauma of this experience caused me to develop some agoraphobia. As I mentioned before, this started off being a matter of not being able to be alone in any capacity. After a few weeks, it was more just a case of struggling to go outside. After a month, I was able to go outside on my own for some period of time, but still struggled with public and busy places. Over the course of the next few months, I gained confidence with being able to live more independently. Over the course of the next year, I gradually conquered the agoraphobia and panic attacks. After around 6 months, I was capable of living independently and was able to move out. I still had a few lapses where I had to travel back to my parents for a few weeks, but these became less frequent and severe until they stopped occurring about a year after the initial experience. To this day, I still suffer with a very mild form of agoraphobia to do being with places that are very far away from home or civilization, but I am confident I will be able to conquer this too with time. This experience completely changed my life. It was traumatic and I will never wish it on anyone. I would urge everyone to respect the power of these drugs and make sure that they take them only in a safe place and a good place, and make sure they have a plan for if the trip goes south. In hindsight, I have gained some positive things from it. My capacity for handling traumatic experiences is much higher now, and it forced me to come clean to my parents about a lifelong mental health issues and seek traditional treatment for these. I still have occasionally moments of panic, and in writing this was very difficult as it caused me to relive some of these moments. The feeling of being alive and reality existing gradually came back, but took a long time to be something that didn't bother me. I still have no proof that I'm alive or that anything exists, but I have the philosophy that it does not matter, as I am capable of enjoying whatever my existence may be. If I'm stuck in a personal hell, it's not so bad. I have quite a lot of fun in my life. It's pretty enjoyable these days. For anyone who's experienced anything like this, it does get better. And please be open with those who care about you and let them help you heal. Life can be great, even if this takes a year or so from you. Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to make any recommendations of drug trip reports, true crime, dark history, anything you want me to cover, let me know in the comments down below. My ears are open, no request is a bad request. I'm so glad that you guys are enjoying the recent content. We're very close to reaching 30,000 subscribers on this channel. Thank you so much for showing your support. It seriously means a lot. That's all I got to say. I'll catch you guys in the next one.